You've heard of Chernobyl, but this explosion happened 30 years earlier, poisoned hundreds of thousands of people, and the world didn't even know it existed. There were no sirens, no warning, no evacuation, just yellow skies and silence. The Soviet government buried it so deep, even locals didn't learn the truth for decades. What if I told you the radiation is still there, and so are the people? In 1957, while the world watched the Cold War unfold in headlines and missile tests, a catastrophe of unspeakable scale erupted in total secrecy at the Mayak nuclear facility near the town of Kyshtym. A storage tank holding high-level radioactive waste exploded with the force of 70 tons of TNT. The blast spread radioactive fallout across hundreds of square kilometers, contaminating rivers, forests, and homes. Yet it would take over 30 years for the outside world to even learn it happened. This was not just a forgotten nuclear disaster. It was deliberately erased. Tonight, we journey into the heart of that silence, into a place where the price of progress was paid in human lives and covered up in bureaucratic fog. We will follow the trail of deceit, the voices that refuse to be silenced and the consequences that still echo in the soil and blood of its survivors. Let us begin. The town that wasn't there. The facility was known only by code, Chelyabinsk 40. Hidden deep in the Ural Mountains, it was the Soviet Union's answer to the American Manhattan Project, a sprawling industrial secret tasked with producing plutonium for Cold War weapons. On the surface, the Kyshtym region appeared as just another shadow dot on the map, a closed city veiled by misinformation. Even the name Kyshtym was a diversion. It wasn't the actual location, just the nearest identifiable town. According to Cold War historians, secrecy was not just a tactic, it was doctrine. The state didn't merely suppress information, it restructured reality for those who lived in the surrounding villages. No official warnings were issued, no evacuations ordered. They were simply left to drink irradiated water, breathe toxic air, and wonder why so many children were suddenly born weak or not at all. Primary sources from the region reflect a haunting pattern. Residents developed rare cancers, experienced reproductive disorders, and watched neighbors fall ill without explanation. Yet no one dared ask questions. "We don't talk about that here," became a refrain passed down like a family prayer. But what if this wasn't negligence? What if it was something far more deliberate? What happened next suggests the Soviet authorities didn't just try to bury the event. They turned the entire contaminated zone into a nature reserve. They called it a gesture of protection. But some suspect it was something else. A live laboratory. And that raises a disturbing question. Were the people of Kyshtym the test subjects all along? We will follow the trail of radioactive silence to the day the tank exploded and the cover-up truly began. The explosion that changed nothing and everything. It didn't sound like war. There were no jets overhead, no sirens in the streets. Just a low, rumbling crack, followed by silence. Then came the strange winds, the yellow skies, and the deaths that had no names. On 29th September 1957, at exactly 4:20 p.m., Containment Tank 14 at the Mayak nuclear facility exploded. It had been failing for over a year. Engineers knew the cooling system was broken, but no one fixed it. Not in a system where admitting failure was more dangerous than the failure itself. The blast ripped open the earth. A concrete lid 1 meter thick was launched into the sky like paper. Over 800 tons of radioactive waste were released into the atmosphere, blanketing 300 square miles in silent poison. It was one of the largest uncontrolled releases of radioactivity in human history, bigger than 3 Mile Island, almost on par with Hiroshima. But officially, nothing happened. According to archival documents, workers were instructed to keep quiet. Local newspapers ran articles blaming the yellow-orange skies on the aurora borealis. Schools stayed open. Crops were harvested. People bathed in rivers laced with plutonium and cesium-137, never knowing why their skin began to blister or their children suddenly stopped growing. This was the Kyshtym disaster, but to the people living through it, there was no name, no broadcast, only the creeping fear that something was wrong, and the suffocating silence of a state that wouldn't say it. Historians analyzing Soviet nuclear policy describe this moment as a perfect storm of ideology and catastrophe. In a system that feared internal weakness more than external war, there was no space for accidents, no place for confession. To admit a disaster was to betray the image of control. So instead of helping the exposed, the Soviet government helped itself by covering everything up, and they moved fast. Food from the region was seized, tested, and quietly destroyed. It was replaced with clean supplies from elsewhere, delivered by rail with no explanation. Villagers were given no warning, only replacement sacks of grain. When the evacuations finally came, they were scattered across decades. Weeks here, years there. Never consistent, never public. And yet, something even more chilling happened next. Rather than mark the danger zone or clean it properly, the authorities rebranded the radioactive fallout area as a nature reserve, not to protect wildlife, but to study it. The East Ural radioactive trace became an open-air laboratory for observing the long-term effects of radiation on flora, fauna, and people. Was this disaster the result of negligence? Or was it used as an opportunity for something darker? In the next chapter, we meet the man who was born into that poisoned silence and decided to risk everything to expose it. His name was Gosman Khabarov, and his life would become the living proof of what the government denied. If this story already feels heavier than you expected, if it made you pause or feel something cold in your chest, don't let it vanish again. Like the video to keep it alive, share it with someone who still believes history is clean, and subscribe if you believe these buried truths deserve to be unearthed one story at a time. Now, let's continue. The man who measured secrets. He was born downstream from a disaster that didn't exist. By the time he could walk, his neighbors were dying of cancers no one named. By the time he could ask questions, no one would answer them. But Gosman Khabarov wouldn't stop asking. Born 6 months after the Kyshtym disaster, in a village quietly drenched by radioactive winds, Gosman grew up surrounded by silence and sickness. Primary sources from the region report drastically increased cases of leukemia, thyroid disorders, infertility, and heart failure in the decades that followed. Yet in school, none of this was mentioned. When the children asked why everyone seemed to be dying young, the answer was always the same. We don't talk about that here. But Gosman talked. He listened. And then he started walking, with a Geiger counter in hand. By the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, files once locked behind steel doors began to surface. According to declassified Russian documents, over 450,000 people were exposed to harmful radiation levels after the 1957 explosion. But official statements downplayed the damage. The zone had been declared safe, and that lie had settled like dust into the lives of everyone who stayed. Gosman knew better. Over the next 10 years, he documented radiation levels, birth defects, and mysterious illnesses in his home region. Alongside his wife, Melia, he formed the watchdog group TKA, gathering thousands of pages of evidence. They weren't scientists. They weren't journalists. Just two villagers armed with a notebook, a dosimeter, and the unshakable belief that someone had to speak. But what they found was worse than anyone expected. Miscarriages, stillbirths, children born with 6 fingers or no eyes, women unable to conceive, entire family lines ended. Gosman and Melia traced these to zones the government had labeled habitable. The same zones they were still encouraging families to resettle, often just 2 kilometers away from the original blast radius. Scholars examining Cold War-era health records have since confirmed links between these abnormalities and prolonged exposure to radiation from Mayak's nuclear waste. Yet for decades, the official line remained unchanged. No harm, no deaths, no danger. For trying to prove otherwise, Gosman was placed on a government watch list. Branded an enemy of the state, he was followed, monitored, threatened, and still he persisted. "If we don't speak, who will?" he said in one interview. "We were used, then forgotten, but our bodies remember." The government's response: a plan to import foreign nuclear waste to the same site, Mayak, as a way to generate funds for community compensation. But for the people already living in a poisoned land, what does compensation even mean? In the next chapter, we'll explore the grim irony of that offer and how the state turned relocation into a trap, forcing survivors to choose between health and survival, between silence and starvation, between truth and erasure. 1,000,000 rubles for a wasteland. They called it resettlement, but what it really meant was this: take the money and never speak of it again. By the early 2000s, decades after the Kyshtym disaster, the Russian government finally offered compensation. Survivors were given a choice: 1,000,000 rubles, around $30,000 at the time, or a new house, supposedly far from the contaminated zone. It felt like a reckoning, but it wasn't. According to public records, many of the new homes were located just 2 kilometers from the blast epicenter. The land had been reclassified as safe, not because it was, but because it was convenient. And the cash offer, for most, it came in pieces, if at all. Bureaucratic delays, sudden disqualifications, incomplete forms. The excuses were endless. Worse still, those who took the money unknowingly waived their rights to future compensation, medical coverage, or legal claims. Others who chose to stay received an insult disguised as support, a monthly payment of 1,320 rubles, less than $16, to offset the cost of living in a radioactive zone. According to sociologist reports, this created a perverse economic prison. If you left, you lost everything: your stipend, your health care, your housing. If you stayed, you got to live with cancer and a check. And so, most stayed. Families clung to houses passed down through generations, even if the walls whispered sickness. Elderly residents feared change more than contamination, and those with children made impossible calculations. Risk long-term radiation exposure, or become homeless in a collapsing system. Gozman Khabarov captured it best. We are prisoners of our own soil. If we move, we disappear. If we stay, we decay. This wasn't a payout. It was a shutdown, a quiet end to an inconvenient chapter in Soviet history, a settlement designed to bury memory, not honor it. And it almost worked. But the tragedy didn't stop at physical suffering. Generational trauma took root. Young couples struggled to conceive. Children were born with abnormalities. And still, no public apology ever came. No plaque, no museum, no collective mourning. Only a question remains. What happens when a nation tells its people to trade silence for survival? In the next chapter, we'll pull back even further to see the global pattern. Because Kyshtym was not an isolated incident. Around the world, governments continue to hide, delay, and deflect responsibility for environmental catastrophes. And if history has taught us anything, it's that radiation isn't the only thing that lingers. Lies do too. Echoes of Kyshtym, the catastrophes still hidden. The Kyshtym disaster of 1957 was never truly buried. Its fallout drifted, not just through soil and blood, but through time, through policy, through precedent, and it's still with us. In 2011, a tsunami struck Japan, and the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant melted down. Residents were told to stay calm. Evacuations were delayed. The true scale of contamination wouldn't be fully admitted for years. In 2014, in Flint, Michigan, families were reassured their tap water was safe, until children began suffering from lead poisoning. It wasn't until 1986, when the Chernobyl reactor exploded and the radioactive cloud reached Europe, that the Soviet Union could no longer hide the scale of its nuclear failures. Even then, the world only learned of Kyshtym because a clerical error exposed it during a United Nations report in 1989. Kyshtym wasn't an isolated event. It was a blueprint. According to environmental justice scholars, what connects these tragedies is not just the toxic exposure, but the calculated silence that follows. It's the same script. Protect the state, minimize the risk, delay accountability. Then, decades later, offer minimal compensation, if any, when outrage becomes impossible to suppress. But survivors don't forget, and some refuse to disappear. To this day, the Mayak site remains under surveillance. Birth defects are still being recorded. In 2006, the Russian government finally offered survivors two options: 1 million rubles or a new house. Most never received the full amount. Others were relocated a mere 2 kilometers from the original blast zone, still within the contamination radius. And through all of it, Gozman Khabarov, born in 1958, continued to fight. Childless, like many in his village, he made truth his legacy. In 1996, he founded the TKA watchdog group. By 2002, he had gathered enough evidence to push for national attention. He was labeled an enemy of the state, but refused to back down. Because this isn't just about the past. It's about the future we're shaping through every silence we allow. Cold War historians warn that the psychological damage caused by long-term state denial often outlasts the environmental harm itself, when entire communities are used as test subjects, first for radiation, then for narrative control. What's left behind isn't just sickness, it's systemic distrust. That distrust isn't unique to 1957 Russia. It's global and growing, but it's also local in ways we're only beginning to understand. Just 600 kilometers north of Kyshtym, another mystery unfolded. In 1959, 9 experienced hikers vanished in the Dyatlov Pass under bizarre, still unexplained circumstances. Their bodies were found mutilated, their tent shredded from the inside, and some of their clothes contaminated with radiation. The official explanations have changed over the years: avalanches, hypothermia, panic, but something never added up. Just like Kyshtym, the full story was buried in secrecy, misdirection, and Cold War paranoia. And just like Kyshtym, the truth may lie in what was never meant to be found. Could the fallout from Mayak, or experiments connected to it, have reached further than we ever realized? Could Dyatlov have been another consequence, another life lost to silence? These are not just unsolved cases. They are symptoms of a time when fear ruled policy and truth came second to power. If the Kyshtym disaster horrified you, then what happened at Dyatlov Pass may haunt you, because sometimes what's hidden in the snow is still burning underneath. Watch our full Dyatlov documentary next, where we uncover how radiation, secrecy, and fear converged to leave 9 people dead and the world asking, what were they running from? The video is on screen now. Please share and like this video. Subscribe to our channel. It matters more than you think. And whatever you do, don't ignore the warnings. Good night.